just to introduce our guest tonight. And he's going to have to live up to this because this is the blurb I've written about him. Andrew is a true Renaissance man, apparently, a specialist in the rare craft of hand painting, lettering, and carving of pictorial signs. He combines traditional sign painting with wood carving, marionette making, illustration, and sculpture. He's also currently writing his first novel, which I hope we'll hear about, and building a mobile marionette theatre. And working from his home studio in rural Cornwall, his clients have included Liberty of London, the Tower of London, television chef Rick Stein, BBC Sport and ITV. And before we hear from Andrew, asking the questions this evening is going to be my colleague Mary Lewis, who is our head of craft sustainability. So I'll hand over to Mary to kick everything off.
Hi there. Yes, good evening, everyone. And thanks for joining us tonight. And hi, Andrew.
Hello, how you doing? All right? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, good.
Striking. Perfect.
Excellent. Perfect time. 4 minutes late.
Talk amongst yourselves for a minute.
It's okay. So should we start at the beginning, Andrew? What was it that first got you hooked into a career as an artist?
I don't think it's anything really that I ever chose. I don't think it's anything that many of us probably ever chose. It's just something that we kind of do, isn't it? I mean, you know, I suspect that a lot of the people that are here that have joined us tonight are the kind of people that when they were if they had a Baby Bell cheese, you know, they would make a little man out of the wax when they'd finished eating it, you know. But when they got older, when they were having like a bottle of fizzy wine, if there was the wire thing over the top, they'd think, oh, I can make a little reindeer out of that. So they'd bend it around and make a reindeer. And, you know, when I was a kid, like when I was in my granny's house in Northern Ireland, I used to take the kindling sticks from next to the fire and a pocket knife and just whittle a little man out of that. So it's just something that I've always done, really. So it kind of just made sense that, you know, when it came around to the time when you're trying to decide what you're going to do to make a living, that you do what you can do. And I'd just always done it. So it was a logical sort of next step, if you like.
Yeah, I feel seen with the Baby Bell wax.
You've done that, haven't you? I know you've
So you started, I think Daniel's got some images you can put up as we're talking, but you started your career as an artist and illustrator.
Yes.
And then what prompted the move? How did you transition towards sign painting and sign writing?
Well, that was the probably one of the greatest sort of influences on all artists throughout history, and it was poverty. I've been working as an artist and illustrator for a long time. I've always been very precise about what I've done. I've always tried to put a lot of detail into what I do. So consequently, it meant that I was taking more and more time painting all of these pictures, and you know, not really sort of very good at being a businessman. I was no good at pricing for these things. It was taking longer and longer to do. I was getting less and less return for them because I was getting picky about it. And so a friend of mine said, well, you know, the sign writer out at Snostell Brewery is retiring. You ought to go for that job. So I applied for it, and on the strength of the fact that I could give them good pictorial pictures, they took me on, and that was in 1998. I'd already done 15 years as an artist and illustrator, and then they took me on in 1998, and yeah, and I worked for them as their sign writer for a couple of years before I got tired of working for a company, because I've always been self-employed, and you get virtually unemployable when you've been self-employed for a long time. You're not very good at sort of working within a company structure. So I came out on my own, brought the brewery contract with me, and then started expanding things beyond that to sell to whoever came along, basically, whatever clients came along. So yeah, that was when the transition happened, basically when I ran out of money.
You've done some really interesting pub signs, haven't you? There's the ones you did for the World Cup. That was
yeah, that one.
That was
there,
a whole series, was it?
It was yeah, there was a series of signs. It was for BT Sport. They were covering the Premier League, and they came to me with a brief through Ogilvy in Cabot Square in London. Ogilvy, the PR group there, and they had the brief for about 6 or 7 different signs that they wanted to do, and then photograph them outside of various pubs. And yeah, it was a complex job, that, because I I did my usual trick of drastically underpricing for it, because I didn't realize quite how much negotiation was going to happen, you know, because I mean, that one there, for example, you can see it's a picture of Gareth Bale, and he's and he's holding the sign there because they gave it to him at the end of the promotion, because the poor chap probably couldn't afford to buy it. So they came to me with this brief. They wanted a dragon, and they wanted him sort of kicking a football. So I'd do a design, and then it would have to go back to Ogilvy, and then from there it'd have to go to BT Sport, and then from there it would have to go to the individual person that I was painting, and then it would have to come back through again with comments and have alterations done, and go all the way back and forth. It took months and months. It took about 7 months to do them all, because it was you know, you're dealing with a lot of different personalities there. You know, there was one that had a portrait of Mourinho on it, and there was Lamb was on another one, and various ones. And so it took a lot longer than I figured. And like I say, I drastically underpriced. I actually found at the end of that job that I'd charged less for the 7 months of work that I did on it than the photographer did for his 4 days of photographing them. And there were lots of photographers in the phone book as well, but I was the only guy that they found that they wanted to get to do those things. So that was a lesson hard learned, I can tell you.
It's been an interesting project, though.
It was a very interesting project. Yeah, it was great, and it was nice. You know, as much as you like to think that you're immune to these things, you get a bit of a tweak from getting feedback from people that you've heard about. You know, and it's like when I did the one of Mourinho, it was called The Coach and Horses, that one. And the comment came back through the line from him that he was very pleased because it made him look about 10 years younger than he actually was at the moment. So so he was well chuffed. And that
you did your job well as a portrait painter then. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's been the job of portrait painters since time immemorial to flatter the sitter, hasn't it?
So your work, I mean, very much traverses this boundary between art and craft. So how do you describe your relationship between art and craft, and is it even useful to make a distinction between art and craft?
I don't think there really is a boundary. If there is, it's a very blurred one. I mean, I've seen people who are you might sort of label them as being craftspeople, but their work is of such beauty and such quality and such vision that it transcends. I don't mean the mere word craft. I mean, craft seems to sort of undersell it. And as for the title of art and being an artist, it's something I've tried to avoid, really. I think I've always had the impression that it seems slightly arrogant to sort of call yourself an artist, because I always, you know, growing up, I always thought that artists were people like sort of Caravaggio and Michelangelo and Vincent van Gogh and people like that. And the rest of us were sort of aspiring and trying to get to that level. Excuse me. So I think labeling, I certainly don't label myself as an artist on things. And I suppose I sort of lie halfway between the two. You can't be an artist unless you have the skills of your craft. So, and you know, you can't be a craftsman or a craftsperson unless you've got a certain amount of artistic skill. So, yeah, I don't really see the difference. And it all means pretty much the same thing to me.
And obviously, tradition and honouring the past seems to be an enduring theme that you return to in your work.
Yeah.
So how important is it that you're working within a tradition, and how does it continue to inspire your work?
Well, it's where it all came from. It's the foundation of everything. I mean, when I was because I taught myself how to draw and paint after I only went up to, it used to be O levels in school. So I only went up to that level with art. I briefly started to go to an art college in Northamptonshire with Doug Fitch there, and we were young and we were kind of a little bit rebellious, so I didn't stay there for very long, and we moved away. So I never really had any sort of art training as such, and most of what I learned about how to paint I learned from books, and the books always tell you the techniques of the old masters. And I'd always admired, again, I go back to people like Caravaggio, and I would study these paintings, and I would study the way that everything was done, and try and emulate that. So I taught myself pen and ink drawing first of all, and then I wanted to put some color in, so I put some line and wash in that. And I was looking back to the old sort of illustrations in books and sort of woodcuts and all of these beautiful crisp line drawings. And then from there, I went on to, I thought, well, it'd be nice to try some pure watercolors. So I got loads of books and did loads of research and taught myself how to paint in watercolors, and looked back on the work of the great watercolorists that had gone before. And then I thought I want to work on a larger scale and maybe try some different techniques. So I'll try oils. So I learned how to paint oils, and then I'll be looking back at people like Constable and all of these sort of people to learn the techniques from there. And you even if you do something completely different, if you come up with a completely different technique and you do something totally new, if you've got that foundation of all of that knowledge that was accumulated over the years, I mean, it's a really solid foundation for anything. You can't go wrong with that if you build on it. I think some people make the mistake of sort of jumping right in and trying to do something new without working from the tradition, without sort of learning the proper skills and the proper ways to do things. If you learn all of that and then discard most of it, you've still got it locked away in there. So the tradition needs to be there to make it work. And yeah, and it kind of, I would like to think that I became a part of that in some small way. You know, some people would sort of maybe look at something that I've done and sort of think, yeah, I'd like to sort of try and emulate some aspects of that. With the sign paintings and stuff, there was one, I didn't send you a picture of it actually. There was one of the there's the punch bowl and ladle at Fiocc, and there's a bunch of characters all sort of gathered around a big hammered copper punch bowl thing, and I actually stole a lot of those figures directly from Caravaggio. I nicked them from probably sacrilegious actually, from the Last Supper, and replaced the figure of Christ in the middle with a portrait of myself. So perhaps I shouldn't have done that, or perhaps I shouldn't have admitted it anyway. But there were but some of the other characters there, I mean, you know, St. Peter was in there, and all sorts of things. You know, the innkeeper that was there in the original painting by Caravaggio. So it was great. So I had all of these figures directly to work on, and because I'd done all of that sort of training and practicing with oils, if you like, trying to get that really strong chiaroscuro painting style that Caravaggio used, then it was kind of nice to have a go at doing that with signwriters enamels and transpose it over to that. Completely different medium to use. The paint is a lot more fluid and a lot more difficult to blend than oil paints, but yeah, it's a nice challenge to do it. And I've tried to do it with a lot of other signs since then as well. So yeah, the tradition is a very important part of it, really.
Do you often paint yourself into your pictures?
I have done on quite a few occasions, and completely honest now, it's not arrogance. What it is I can afford to get models. So the only face that I've got readily to hand all the time is in the mirror, you know. So if I want a facial expression or something, then I think I have to take a photograph of myself or prop a mirror up and work from that. Simply because it's easiest, you know.
Sounds great. We've got a comment, actually, a question. So Yayan, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry about that. It's Leland. Yeah,
Oh, sorry, Leland.
Nice to meet. No, that's fine. That's fine. But Andrew, I think I just heard the actual answer to my question, but it kind of begs to ask even another question. I was asking if you use traditional artist oils in your creations. They look very much like the paintings that you're talking about, like Caravaggio. I love those paintings, and that's kind of the lightning rod that sent me here today. Is your signs do cross blur, you know, traditional signage with art, and I love that, and I want to do that on my own. And I saw that you mentioned that you use sign enamels, but I have so much trouble with sign enamels compared to oils. I'm studying painting with a great teacher who's teaching traditional painting in the old style, and that's kind of where I'm like looking to synthesize all this together. But like mixing sign enamels, could you talk about the difficulties of doing that and coming up with like an artistic looking painting?
Yeah, well, the sign enamels, because as you know, having used both those and oils, they're a lot more liquid than oil paints. You know, the oil paints are a lot more sort of pasty. There is a medium you can mix with it called Smith's Cream, which I've bought from Rights of Limb, which will slightly thicken it up, but it also sort of takes down the sort of percentage of pigment that's in it a little bit, because obviously you're mixing a medium with it. So I don't use that a lot, but it can make it a little bit easier to blend. I think it's just a question of sort of working the techniques and adapting them. What I tend to do is I will still lay out a painting with sort of grisaille underpainting, you know, with the light and the shade, and I'll sort of get it basically down like that. And I'll then start putting color over the top of it. But some of that darker color, if you're using a very dark umber, then it will sort of show through the paint a little bit as you're working it, and give you a basic sort of roadmap as to where to put the shades and to put the other colors and the high points and stuff like that. And when it gets towards the end, I'm giving away my trade secrets here now, so I hope you appreciate this.
I really do.
Sometimes I'll mix a bit of pigment in with a bit of Craftmaster varnish, sign varnish, really high quality sign varnish. You've got to be very careful what sign varnish you use, because if you just try using general purpose outdoor varnish, it will yellow, it will crack, it will fall apart. Craftmaster, I'm not getting anything for bigging them up, I'm just telling you it's good stuff. And if you mix a little bit of pigment with that, you can use it as a glaze, and you can put a bit of color over that, and you can work other colors into it whilst it's still a little bit damp.
Yeah.
Or you can sort of just let it dry and then work high points and low points over it again. But what I do a lot of the time is I'll lay down two colors right close side by side, and then use a fan blender or something and blend those colors together actually on the sign, rather than trying to get all the colors on the palette. I'll have the colors arranged in a basic sort of palette around there, and then just sort of blend them together when they're on the sign fairly quickly before they go too tacky. You've got to get just the right point, because if you do it when it's too wet, then you'll just drag the paint around all over the place. You leave it till it's too dry, and you'll just end up sticking your brush on you. So.
That's great. And just one follow on. What would be your palette when you're doing kind of a full color sign like the Napoleon there or something like that?
Well, it depends on the subject, and I mean, to be honest with you, working on different parts of the painting, it would be a different palette every day, because you know how sign writers and enamels, they dry so quickly on the palette.
Yeah.
They go pretty well unworkable. Then if I was doing the sky, then I would have a palette of the blues and the greys, and maybe some of the cloud colors that would go into that. That's another thing. You can still use some of those same scumbling techniques that you use with oil painting, where you put a glaze color over the top of something and lift it off with a rag if you want to get high points on a cloud or something like that. That still works with sign writers enamels. Okay. So you can use a lot of those same sort of techniques. Yeah, then on the face, just mixing up the sort of skin tones in the usual sort of way. Because I use a lot of shadows, I tend to use an awful lot of dark umbers and ochres like that. I just like those earthy colors.
Yeah. That goes back to the traditional look. That's so great.
Well, yeah, you'd probably find actually that traditionally those things didn't have nearly so much brown and yellow in them. It's just that the varnish has gone really bad over a couple of hundred. That's the way I like to think of them anyway, so that's the way I paint them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those great questions. So you're best known as a sign painter, but you're also an illustrator, a carver, a sgraffito artist, and marionette maker. How do all of these skills interact with each other in your working life?
Well, I mean, we've spoken about this before, and I mean, it's one of the things that's becoming clearer and clearer to me the more time I spend on it and the older I get, is that every time I do anything, it informs everything else. If I'm doing a bit of sketching, it might just be doodling in my sketchbook. It might not be anything that's going to be commercial, but something that I learn when I'm doing that is going to come in handy when I'm doing a bit of sgraffito on one of Doug and Hannah's pots, or whether it's something I'm going to use for a carving or something like that. And likewise, if I'm doing a carving, because it's forcing my mind to think in 3 dimensions and to think how rounded things are, then when I go back to drawing or painting, I'm more aware of the 3-dimensional thing that I'm painting. And there can be a tendency, if you're just painting all the time, to end up painting things looking very flat. So that sort of helps to bring that in. And of course, modeling, I always make a maquette before I do any carving. So modeling informs the carving informs the painting and the illustrating, and all of that goes into the writing as well. Because when I'm doing writing, sometimes I'll start with a piece of writing and I'll think, great, I could stick an illustration with that. So I'll start to work on an illustration. And other times I'll just draw a picture that I really like, and I think that suggests a bit of narrative that I could put into the book. So it all kind of bounces around and everything interacts. And I would say with some confidence that no time that you spend with a pencil or a brush or a carving tool in your hand is ever wasted. Because even if you're not making sense of all of that stuff right now, if it doesn't seem to be, if you're not making money out of it right now, if you're not using it on a project that you're going to be selling right now, everything that you're learning is going to come into play somewhere down the line. It is always time well spent. You can never waste your time doing an artistic pursuit.
Yeah, that's a good message. I think, Daniel, we've got some images of that wonderful sgraffito work, haven't we? Perhaps you can pop it up.
Oh, that's one of the illustrations from the book.
That's the illustrations, yeah.
Yeah. That's the little girl, the main character in the book. That's another illustration from the book there. Yeah. Carved head of that was the first full puppet head that I carved with a sort of movable jaw and all the rest of it. And yeah, my missus got most upset because I cut the sheepskin rug to make the hair for his moustache. Yeah, needs must. And that's Woody. He's one of my early marionettes as well. And he's that poor chap actually has ended up being a bit like Frankenstein's monster. Every time I want to try a new kind of joint, then I'll sort of take a bit off Woody and make a new joint and try and make it better than it was before. So, but yeah, he's almost like family to me now. Woody, he's been kicking around in the studio so long.
I know, I feel a bit sad for Woody now.
Woody's all right. He quite likes
it. So, do you, out of all the projects you've done, have you got one that you're most proud of?
Probably the next one, I expect. You know, whatever you do, whenever you've done it, you always look back on it, and you don't see it in the same way as anybody else sees it when they're looking at it. When you look at it yourself, you're probably the same yourself with your own work, with those beautiful baskets that you make. When you look at it, you can only see where you went a little bit wrong on it, and you think, I hope nobody ever notices that. Yeah, there are one or two. The Napoleon sign that you put up there, that was quite early in my sign painting career, and it was worth putting a lot of detail into that one because it was quite low to the ground. The Napoleon is in Boscastle. It's a little pub, very, very old, and the sign is low down to the ground, so it was worth it so people could see the detail. So I really went to town on that, spent far too much time on it, and I was always quite proud of that. Some of the stuff that I've done for the Trafalgar Tavern in Greenwich, I've done a lot of carved work for Frank. He was the first one really to sort of indulge me in the time to sort of commission me to do carved work, because I wanted to get into doing the carved work and take some of the skills that I'd learned in doing puppets and put them into the signs. So there was that crossover again. And some of the carved stuff I've done for him is very satisfying as well. And yeah, there's a lot of things that I like, but then there's a lot of things that I look back on and I wish I had a chance to do them again and do them just a little bit better. The sgraffito stuff that I did in the last couple of years, actually. Now, the satisfying thing about that is twofold. Sgraffito is relatively new to me, but it's basically, again, it's pen and ink drawing, only you're doing it with a sharp point and you're obviously scratching through a light-colored slip down to the darker body underneath. And the thing about that is it gave me a chance to sort of rethink the stuff that I did for the coronation. It gave me a chance to rethink the King's coat of arms, which I've painted many times, because you can imagine how many pubs are called the King's Arms. And I sort of reimagined every separate part of it and put more detail into it. And the first one that I did that on was on Hannah McAndrew's platter. And I mean, Hannah's been a good friend of mine for years. And having this big round platter, this big space to work on, a nice big flat space. And to actually sit in their studio, hers and Doug's studio, and actually be sort of scratching this sgraffito thing down into the plate, that was immensely satisfying, because it's a collaboration with somebody that you not only admire as a craftsperson, but who's a friend as well. And I'd done a few bits of sgraffito before with Doug, her husband. Everybody knows Doug. Hi, Doug. And then he made this great big harvest jug, you know, one of the biggest harvest jugs he'd made at the time. He's gone on to make some monsters since, but this was like a big one at the time. And I did another sort of design on that on the coronation theme as well. And Doug and myself have been best mates since we were like 17 years old, you know, so for sort of 40 odd years we've been holding each other's backsides out the fire. So it's to be actually able to work on a collaborative work together with somebody who means that much to you personally, you know, that's probably got to be the pinnacle of it, I imagine.
Yeah, great. It's an amazing piece of work. And we've got a question from Diana.
Amazing stuff to work on. The pot and the plate, work on, lovely work.
I mean, you couldn't collaborate with some better people, really, could you?
Well, you've got to be choosy.
Yeah. Diana, would you like to ask Andrew your question? Are you there, Diana?
I think she's muted.
I can, well, do you want me to ask it, Diana? She said, can you explain a bit more about your marionette work?
Oh, the marionette work. Well, puppets are something that I've always been interested in. They've always sort of fascinated me because it's such a creepy thing, really, a puppet in a lot of ways. But I quite like creepy. It's the fact that you can sort of you can give life to something that's inanimate like that, and it making puppets seemed to be the logical conclusion to a lot of the things that I do. It tied in a lot of the things that I'm interested in, designing them in the first place. I've always drawn a lot of sort of elfy characters and stuff like that, and all sorts of extreme characters. So to be able to design something first of all, and then to be able to sort of model a rough idea of what I wanted it to look like, and then to take a piece of wood and carve it, and then to learn how to make the joints so you can make this thing move. And the whole process of making puppets is absolutely fascinating, because you start out, you got these lumps of wood, and it's just lumps of wood, and you make the joints first of all. See, it's quite blocky looking. You've got a rough shape of it, and you've got the joints all working, and then you're sort of fine tooling it down, and you're working it down after that. And there comes a point when you start putting the arms and the legs and the head on the torso, and you've got the little biscuit joint in the middle if you're doing it with this sort of put-a-shine system, and it'll bend in a certain way, and you hold it in your hands, and suddenly it drapes across your hands like a living thing. And at that point, it's like a shock of electric goes through you. It's like you've created something now, and this actually feels like you've made a living thing. And you could no more take that and throw it in the fire then than you could with a small animal. You know, there is something that has happened. There's something strange that has happened with that puppet at that point. And the same sort of thing can happen when you're manipulating a puppet as well, because you take a thing and you think that you've gone as far as you can with that puppet, and you think that you've seen all of the magic you can see with that puppet, and you get it on strings. And I did marionette training at the Little Angel Theatre in Islington. Long string marionettes off the bridge there. Most fantastic, magical place. 10 days I was up there, and it was 10 days of absolute heaven. And I went there because I wanted to learn how to make the marionettes so that they could move properly. And I thought, if I'm going to learn how they're going to move properly, I need to know what's required of them. I need to know how to move them. So went up there, and I was taught by Ronnie Ledrew and Sue Dacre, two absolute giants of the puppet world, and lovely, lovely people. And I took one of the puppets that they had there, and I was up on the high bridge, and I was looking down onto the stage, and I was trying to walk this puppet across the stage in my very amateurish sort of way. It was like sort of day 2 or day 3 that I was there, and I was still trying to make this thing walk. And I've been watching Ronnie Ledrew dance these things across the stage like they were living. And I was trying to walk it across, and suddenly on the stage, the puppet did something that I didn't expect it to do, because of the way it was strung, or because of the way it was jointed, or something. It just made a little move that just seemed to be something all of its own doing. And it was like static sort of came up the strings. It was very, very weird. And I'm holding the thing in my hand, and I thought, whoa, and I got a full-on neck mohican at the moment, you know, and I was thinking, whoa, this is strange. I got this thing is actually like a living thing. And from then on, that was the point when I realized that I wasn't going to tell this puppet what to do. I was going to negotiate. I was going to ask it if it would do this and it would do that. But because of the way it was made and the way that it was strung, it was always going to do that in its own way, every bit as much as what I told it to do. And that's the magic of puppets. That's the magic of puppets for me. It's just incredible.
Andrew, I remember you from 10 years ago at the Letterheads, and you very kindly, so we were in Rochester.
Yeah, so great do that was.
Sign convention, for people who don't know, the Letterheads we have every year, and it's a sign convention. And I was brand new to this. I just walked in the door. I was a calligrapher, but I didn't know anything about it. And Andrew very kindly helped me with a gilding piece. We were working with Dave Smith, who's a very famous glass gilder. And I remember you saying about you were going to like throw it all in and go off and have a puppet theatre, and you were going to get a caravan and tour it round. So I just wanted to know about your progress with all of that, because it was such a magical moment. And I thought, oh, I'll come and help you, because it's so wonderful.
It's been one of those things. It's an ongoing sort of project. I've actually, I had at that point, I had a cart, a wooden cart that I was going to turn into this mobile marionette theatre. Since then, my plans changed a little bit. I got rid of that cart and I got another one, which is probably slightly bigger actually. But it's still the plan. The plan is still to build this mobile theatre, and I've got all of the materials there. I've got huge panels of pitch pine that came out of an old chapel down west that I bought years ago. And I've got various other bits and pieces of old architecture, wooden architecture and stuff. And I've drawn plans. I mean, if you look on my Facebook page, I think there's a photo album which is to do with the theatre. And it's got a small section. It's got about 60 or 70 pages of designs for different sort of variations on this puppet theatre. The one that I'm currently working on actually is different from any of those. But the problem is finding the time for everything, because the one problem with being interested in an awful lot of things is that you just don't get the time to complete a lot of stuff, and you end up getting very frustrated with yourself because I suffer from an excess of inspiration. If you know the next shiny thing that comes along, I'll see something. I say, "Oh, wood engraving. That looks nice. I'll have a go at that wood engraving. I bet I could do that." And I'll go out and I'll buy some tools and I'll get some sections of boxwood and I'll start doing a bit of wood engraving. And then I'll think, "Oh, I could do that a little bit bigger. Lino cut. That's the answer, because big pieces of lino. I'll go and buy some lino and I'll use those same tools and some of my carving gouges and do that." So it's still ongoing. It is still an intention. I will do it. You know, I can't step away from everything to give it as much time as it needs, and it's very frustrating trying to work out how exactly I'm going to make that work. The biggest danger when you've got too many different projects on as well is that sometimes you'll sort of walk into the studio and you've got all of these nice, interesting projects around you that you want to work on. And it's really difficult to prioritize one. So you end up walking around in circles 3 or 4 times and then going back home for another cup of coffee because you just can't make your mind up which one you're going to do, you know? So the puppet theatre will happen.
Perhaps the idea would be to have a call out to the Heritage Crafts and anyone else, and we can all come down for a week and get stuck in.
We'll get a crew together. Everybody bring your own cordless screwdrivers. We'll build a theatre.
Put my name down for that. Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, you know, craftspeople never retire, right? They just carry on until they fall over.
Oh, yeah.
So you've got plenty of time.
I've said it many times. I've said it to Doug many times because he was sensible. He used to have a teaching job and he got a pension plan together, but I've never put any of that together. So I've always said my idea of retiring is when they carry me out from this studio feet first and they prise the paintbrush from my cold and lifeless fingers, and then I will be retired.
Sean has got a question as well about marionettes. Are you there, Sean?
I am. Thank you so much. Well, Andrew, it's great after following you on Facebook to see you face to face virtually. But yeah, I technically still run a marionette theater. I took it over, I guess 15 years ago. My problem, I'm a show director at Disney now, so I don't have a lot of time. But the other thing is I'd love to reopen the marionette theater, but I don't have a lot of space. It's the location. Yeah. So I saw, this is not the question I wrote down in chat, but I was thinking of it because I know you're building the mobile, you know, a cart or a caravan or something. Mm-hmm. I will tell you this. Epcot used to have a gypsy caravan pulled by a pantomime horse that did marionettes when that park first opened. And I have the blueprints for that. I'm not supposed to necessarily have, but I have tell no one. And we are looking right now for German marionettes. So if anyone can do an accent, and would like to spend Christmas in Florida. But my question was, I know you are so inspired and you do these sketches. Do you also, are you creating these characters out of whole cloth? Are you writing the stories too? Are you at least in your head? Are you coming up with a play for the puppets?
Well, I've never really considered myself to be a performer. Like I say, the only sort of aspect of performance that came into it was I felt that I needed to know how basically to perform puppets so that I knew how to make them. And I always thought for my own mobile theatre, if I was making a cast of characters for that, I would make some generic characters that could be literally like a cast of actors that you could dress in a slightly different way for different productions. I even thought at one point about how about if the marionettes were like sort of plain-faced marionettes and there was just like a magnetic mask of a different face that you could just drop onto them to make them into another character.
Right.
So with minor alterations to the stringing, you know, you could give them a little bit of a different sort of gait and a different way that they would walk, but basically use that same cast of characters for everything. So you know, it might be asking a little bit too much of them, and a purist marionette maker would say, no, you've got to start from scratch and you've got to make that character entirely around the personality that they're going to inhabit.
Right.
And if you look at marionette makers like Bernd Grodnik, and you look at the way that he makes his puppets, it starts out from exactly what the character of that puppet's going to be. Right. And they're so perfectly realized when it comes to the end of that whole process, you know, that you can tell that he's gone at it that way. So whether my way will work or not remains to be seen.
No, well, I love that idea of having a repertoire of actors, you know, your cast who can do different shows. That's great. Yeah, it's like the Sicilian marionettes, you know, or Punch and Judy cast where you do variations on the show. I'll polish it out, say, you know, you do variations on the show, but it's the same cast.
But if you got a basic sort of cast, you got like a sort of young man, young girl, old lady, old man, maybe a witch or a wizard or something like that.
Of course.
There's got to be a disjointed skeleton in there somewhere just for a bit of comedy on it, you know.
Of course, yes.
Random animals, you know, and there you go. You got the cast of almost every play that was ever written.
Well, I don't want to take up all your time, but I mean, that must be how the old motion men or puppeteers of the past did it. They wouldn't have had 7 shows with 100 puppets. They would have had to have worked around what they have so they could travel. You know?
Yeah, well, there's an old horse-drawn cart that is in a sort of partially restored state at the Dingles Fairground Museum, just up not very far up the road from here. And that was a marionettist, a traveling marionettist cart originally, and he traveled with a marionette show. It's no bigger than your average sort of car-drawn caravan.
Right.
There's no way in there he had room for 50, 60 marionettes. You know, he must have been either doing the same show all the time or having very adaptable marionettes.
Right. It's great. A good idea.
Let's hope it works.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, Andrew, I wanted to talk to you a bit about, you've talked about old masters, but I wondered if you had any role models in craft who have inspired your work.
Well, as I said with the painting, you know, people like Caravaggio, Van Gogh, Constable, Joseph Wright of Derby, you know, all of these wonderful sort of painters, carvers, Grinling Gibbons, of course, the master of carving lime, and puppet makers, as I mentioned, Bernd Grodnik, you know, is I mean, he's current, but I mean, he's a man I look up to a great deal. Ronnie Burkett as well in Canada makes incredible marionettes. So they've got the most fantastic characters, quite a controversial sort of character. I love him to bits, he's great. And but a lot of the people actually who really inspire me, strangely, are people who are younger than me, who are sort of following on. I had you've met Jack Styling before, and Jack was working with me in my studio for a while here after he'd finished at university. And Jack came into the workshop and he brought in a huge raft of skills, I mean, the guy is mechanically a genius because he builds automata. He's got an artistic mind so that he can sort of work up designs. He's got a very artistic turn of mind, and he can carve and he can paint. And I taught him how to paint signs, and he picked it up just like that. Carvers, there's a young lady who's incredibly talented, Clooney Fretton, who was on the Bill Bailey Mastercrafters series, and she carved a coat of arms in lime that was shown as part of that sort of presentation that was as good as any I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of carved coats of arms, and it was just astonishingly beautiful. I couldn't see how it could have been improved in any way. So, I mean, a lot of the people that inspire me aren't necessarily people who died 500 years ago, 300 years ago, or whatever. It can be people who are working now. And you know, there's always something to learn from everybody, but then in every sort of generation there's sort of 2 or 3 real standout sort of artists that you just can't ignore their work, and they're just gonna, you know, they're going to influence you, and you're going to always be in awe of their work and trying to stay one step ahead of them, or trying to catch up with them in some cases, like, you know, just think they're snapping at my heels now.
That's a great message though, isn't it? Because I think people give there's often a lot of negative things said about young people, but I think some of the young people we work with absolutely blow us away all the time with their skill and determination.
And the thing that young people have got as well that people of my generation don't have is a hell of a lot more energy. You know, they can keep going at it for longer, and so they, you know, if they're sort of steered in the right direction and taught in the right direction, and they've got some natural sort of ability themselves, they got decades to perfect these skills, and they're going to leave people like me in the dust, you know, because they're already phenomenal, and you know, give them another few decades, and they'll be the names that people remember, not mine.
And how would you like to be seen for the next generation of makers? What would you like your legacy to be?
The guy that didn't die in poverty. I don't know. I would like people to. I like putting nice things out there. I like putting nice things out into the world. I mean, it all sounds very corny. It's going to sound terribly corny, but for a while in the early stages of my career, when I was making a living as an artist and illustrator, and I was getting poorer and poorer and poorer, and the magic was going out of it, and I ended up doing a lot of work that I didn't enjoy doing. I didn't like doing. I was doing a lot of designs for brochures. I was designing merit stickers for schools, for God's sake, and that is soul destroying work, let me tell you. And so I was kind of going off the boil, and I was losing the will to live. So I started as a sign painter, and I thought, this is the death of it. I'm not an artist anymore. I'm just commercially painting signs. And then my perception of it slightly sort of shifted, and I thought, okay, well, it's public art. A lot more people are going to see these signs than see a painting that goes into a gallery and disappears into somebody's home and doesn't get seen again. And then I had my daughter, my first daughter. And from the moment that she was born, all I wanted to do was to fill the world with nice things for her. And I wanted her to be able to grow up being proud of what her dad had done. And I wanted her, she probably never, if people sort of say anything at any point in the future, oh God, yeah, that's my old man, as kids do. But, I know that she's proud of some of the stuff that I do, and that's what I want. And as far as the way the rest of the world sort of perceives me, then they can make their own choices and do their own thing. But as long as my little girl looks up to me, I say my little girl, she's nearly 16 now, but I mean, as long as she looks up to me, then the rest of it doesn't really matter too much. I just go ahead and do my thing.
And what would your advice be for a young person who is interested to get into craft?
Start now. Start right now. Don't stop and don't think about it and don't hesitate, because the sooner you start, the longer you've got to get it perfect. And don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it or that you shouldn't do it. And I think if you've got the kind of drive that you want to do it anyway, it's probably not a choice. Like I said right back at the start, it's one of those things that if it's in you to do, if you sort of go into denial and you try and sort of shove it back to a sort of weekend hobby, then it's going to keep nibbling away at the back of your head. It's going to be driving you insane. So, go for it and seize it, and don't be too prescriptive about what you do. You can start out in one direction doing one thing, but if a bit of inspiration comes in that sort of knocks you off course and takes you in a different direction to do something different, go with it, follow it. It's a story. It doesn't have a written ending that you're working towards. All that you've got is where you are now, and you go with the flow, and you take it where it takes you. So, but keep doing it and put the work in. Keep putting the hours in.
And from a heritage crafts point of view, obviously we are here to try and help support the next generation of skills and people coming in. So how can we do that? How can heritage crafts support and foster skills for the next generation of sign painters and puppet makers?
I think the best way, I think you're already doing an incredible job, by the way. I genuinely do, and it's an absolute privilege to be associated with the HCA. It really is, and I think probably the best way moving forwards is to pretty much carry on doing what you're doing. It's if you're creating an almost sort of mentorship environment where you're putting young people in touch with people who are further down the line, that particular career or that particular craft or whatever, and you're putting people together, because when you're working on your own, I mean, the majority of my life, like I said about the painting, I've worked in my own workshop, and before I had the internet, I was buying books and stuff like that, and videos, old VHS videos to learn how to paint. Tom Keating on Painters was a great one. It's a fantastic oil painter. But anyway, and so I was learning all of this stuff by myself. But if you put people in touch with somebody who can teach them things, they'll learn an awful lot quicker, because I had to discover a lot of things myself that were already common knowledge to anybody that was already painting oil paintings. So it's, you can save a lot of time, get further down the line. And it's also a much more useful way to learn, sort of one-to-one with somebody. Watching them working with them is always going to be a lot better than just sort of reading about it or watching a video about it or something like that. And the other thing as well, the other thing that is the biggest thing that holds people back is a terribly, terribly mundane thing, but it's funding. You know, I mean, people trying to do creative things. It is really, really hard to make a living doing creative things. You know, even people who are sort of quite high up in their own particular skill base. So if there's ways that you can sort of identify funding that can be properly directed and that can be used as part of this thing of putting people together with mentors as well, then those two things and the events that you do as well, they're great. I mean, you know, open events and really sort of pushing them and getting them out there, and getting lots of people coming in doing different things, so that like at the conference at Derby, you know, you had all those different stands and you had the musician makers, musical instrument makers, and you had, you know, you had everything there. You had puppeteers, you had all sorts of people doing all sorts of things, and that sort of environment, being surrounded by other creative people, is such a there's a static in the air when you get a lot of people who are interested in making stuff, people who've got a creative turn of mind, and they've all got something in common because they all like making stuff. And that sort of static, if you can sort of draw young people into that sort of environment, then they're going to get infected with that stuff whether they want to or not. And they're going to carry that out full of ideas, all sorts of inspirations, their heads buzzing, and they're going to take it out there and they're going to do something big with it. So
fabulous. We've got a great question here from Andy. Andy, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Andrew. Really, it's a bit of curiosity. Outside of your current repertoire of skills, and obviously let's exclude finance because that's always a factor, what would you like to set aside some time to really learn and get to grips with?
Oh, man, where do I start? How long have you got? Well, I touched on the whole thing about sort of about lino cut earlier on, and I'm really interested in following that up through. I want to go and do a course on that, and that's I'm really interested in sort of pushing that a little bit further. I've done bits and pieces of a lot of stuff. I've done bits and pieces of wood engraving as well, and I would like to spend some time to sort of really take that to another level on beyond that. It pretty much changes sort of month on month, really, because there's so many things that I want to do, and the problem is that I'm a bit like a magpie, really. I can be sort of carrying away on doing my own thing, and I'll suddenly go, "Ooh, shiny thing," and I want to go and do that then. And there's always something that's sort of grabbing my attention. I want to do some more stuff with ceramics, with some of the money from the HCA award. I bought a kiln, a pottery kiln. It was going cheap. And, you know, I mean, I've been hanging around with Doug all my life, you know, and he's a potter, he's a bad influence on me. So I went out and I bought this kiln, damn great thing, had a hell of a job getting it in the van. And it's downstairs in the workshop now. I haven't got it wired in yet because I don't know quite how I'm going to get about doing that. But I want to do some more clay sculptures, and I want to take the sgraffito thing a bit further as well. I've got all sorts of ideas about sculptures that I would really like to do. And but again, it's finding the time to do it all. And I'm almost scared to think about the other things that I want to do, because as soon as I start thinking about them, I'm going to get distracted by them again. And then the signs, like the one behind me here, that has been there for months and months, is going to be there for months and months longer, because there'll be something else that has taken me away from what I should be doing if I was only good at running a business, which I'm not.
Thank you.
Right.
Can I jump in there, Mary, just for a quick one? Just on that topic of the Heritage Craft Maker of the Year award, we've got your immediate predecessor here, Hannah McAndrew. Hannah, I don't know if you can unmute or not, but I just wondered how you felt passing on your title to this gentleman.
Hiya.
Right, so that.
Well, it was Doug and me that nominated Andrew for the award anyway, so we're very happy.
You had to think then, didn't you? You were going to call me Frank, weren't you?
I was going to call you Frank.
They all know me as Frank. I don't know why, but they do. They always have.
So yeah, delighted. Couldn't go to anybody better, really, could it?
Thank you.
We shed a tear, didn't we?
We did.
Did a few myself.
Fantastic. Well deserved for both of you.
Thank you.
I think Daniel's got the picture of the sgraffito work now as well, just so that everyone can see it. I'm sure a lot of people have already seen it, but as a collaborative piece of work, it's absolutely stunning.
It was a real joy to work on that.
Yeah, it is amazing. We have 5 minutes left, I think. So if anyone else has any more questions, shout now. Oh, we've got a couple of things here in the chat.
I think there was another one from Diana.
Oh yeah, another one from Diana. Yes, do you want to ask your question again, Diana?
Yes, I just wondered, going back to the puppet making, whether there are like certain materials that you use and certain materials that you would never use. I'm assuming there's got to be an element of light versus the balance of the puppet. So I just wondered how you went about that.
Well, usually when I'm making puppets, they're carved out of lime wood, simply because it's beautiful to carve, simply because if you're carving it in sort of the usual sort of puppet proportions, it's beautifully weighted anyway. You might need to, if it's a very large one, you might need to hollow the head, or you might need to hollow the body or whatever, but you can push lime wood as far as you like. It's a very, very forgiving material, and it's still strong, as you know. And it's so lime wood is always my one of choice. I have made some that have been a combination of wooden joints, and I've even used air drying clay to make the heads. And if they're sort of built around like a sort of hollow, like a bit of tin foil scrunched up, and then masking tape around that, and then you build the air drying clay around that with a bit of wire armature for anything that's sticking out, that's very satisfying. And if you're putting a paint finish or a metal finish or anything on that, then it actually looks very much like the wood, so it doesn't look like you've stuck a different material onto something else. I mean, as far as materials, there shouldn't be anything that you won't use. I mean, if you look at Fettig's work, I mean, he was using bits of sort of plastic pipe and old plastic bottles and all sorts of stuff like that, and making most incredible puppets that moved incredibly well. That's not something that appeals to me personally, because by nature I'm a bit of a Luddite, and I like old-fashioned materials. I like clay and I like wood and I like all of these sort of very organic materials. But I would never say that anybody shouldn't use anything for puppetry. I mean, that as long as it's got the artistry, as long as it's got the skill in it, and as long as it's carefully planned out and it's beautifully made, then it could be 3D printed, it could be made out of anything else. Those things are never anything that I'm going to do, because I'm just not interested in that aspect of it. But there is room for anything. The important thing about it is the craft that goes into it, the art that goes into it. It's not about the materials. The materials could be anything.
So how do you see the influence of AI in infringing on the work that you do going forward? I'm thinking about the next generation of puppeteers.
I see it as being the largest existential threat to art that there is at the moment. I'm completely anti it, and it's not because it doesn't do good things. I mean, there's a place for AI, there's a place for it in industry, and there's a place for it in surgery and all sorts of things. In art, the problem that I've got with it, the biggest single problem I've got, is that I use social media and I use the internet and that quite a lot, and I pull a lot of inspiration from things, and I'm connected to a lot of really, really talented craftspeople and artists, several of whom have joined this meeting. And I want you all to know that your work is none of it's wasted. I take this stuff like a tsunami of inspiration when I switch on the computer. And the stuff that people can make, and the stuff that people can paint, and the things that people write, incredibly beautiful, wonderful things. And I'm completely awestruck by them. And then you'll see a piece of AI art that will come up that on the surface looks absolutely fantastic. And when you look at it a little bit closer, it becomes obvious that it's AI. And I'm really annoyed that it has taken away my ability to be wonderstruck by anything that I see online, because I'm never sure whether it's been made by a damn computer or whether it's been put together by somebody who's been using a paintbrush all of their life. You know, and I'm angry about the fact that my sense of wonder has been watered down by AI. And I think that's the biggest single threat with AI, is that it takes the magic away.
I totally agree. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. I think Daniel's just got a few words.
Yes, thanks, Mary. Just to say thank you everyone for coming. It's been an absolutely wonderful session as always. Especially thanks to those who made a donation during sign up, which is always gratefully received. We do say that the best way to support us is to become a member if you're not already, as well as providing a little bit of financial security for us. It also means that you're part of our growing movement and community of craftspeople all around the world who are dedicated to the continuation of these skills, which we think are really important. So the links for all of those are up on your screen. Also mention the awards currently open for nominations, and you can also nominate yourself, including Maker of the Year, which has been mentioned a few times tonight. This year we've split it into 4 Maker of the Year awards for England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And a UK winner will be selected from the 4 country winners for an additional prize on top of that. That's really worth looking at. Do check out our website. I think the closing date is the 23rd of May. So you've got a couple of weeks left. And that's all from me. Just to say a huge thank you to Andrew. It's been absolutely fascinating. And I'm going to hand back to Mary for final thoughts.
Thanks, Daniel. So it's been a wonderful conversation. I think we can all agree that Andrew is definitely someone who is keeping the magic alive in heritage crafts and in sign writing and puppet making and all the amazing things that he does. So I'd like to say a huge thank you to Andrew for being with us this evening and giving his time to talk to us, and to all of you for coming along and spending some time with us this evening from all over the world, which is great to see.
Say thank you as well, by the way, for giving me the opportunity to do this, for the whole thing about the award in the first place, and for the work that you're doing, the continuing work that you're doing. I mean, you know, I actually feel like I've found a body of people now that is actually fulfilling the remit that I would like a body of people to be doing, which is exactly what you're doing, which is keeping the heritage crafts going. And so, yeah, couldn't be happier.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much. And you're definitely a very valued part of that community. And I think it's time now. It's just coming up to 8 o'clock, and we'll say good night. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
See you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.